Hello and welcome to Eye on Africa here on France 24. I'm Fraser Jackson. Here are the stories making headlines across the continent this evening. Ethiopia's parliament votes to remove the Tigrayan TPLF party from a list of terrorist organizations. The move is another major step towards de-escalation in an area that has been torn apart by 2 years of civil war. Uganda's passing of a severe anti-LGBTQ+ law has sparked international backlash, with the UN, US and rights groups asking President Museveni to think twice before signing it into law. The bill could see people face life in prison. And we'll head to Libya, where the once banned sport of boxing is becoming increasingly popular, despite being critically underfunded. Our top story this evening. In a major step of de-escalation, Ethiopia's parliament has removed the Tigray region's main political movement from a list of terrorist organizations. Addis Ababa waged a 2-year war against the TPLF, sparking a humanitarian crisis that killed thousands and displaced millions. A truce was signed in November last year, which will see an interim local government formed. Carolyn Lamberley has the details.
It's been 4 months since a peace agreement was struck between warring parties in Ethiopia. On Wednesday, Ethiopian lawmakers removed the Tigray People's Liberation Front, which fought federal forces for 2 years, from the country's list of designated terror groups.
We might even think that differences such as ours are irreconcilable. But still, we should have the courage to critically and honestly debate them, to come up with possible solutions under one roof. The only and the less costly way forward for all of us as a nation is sticking to a round table as we have demonstrated.
It's unclear how many MPs voted in favor of the move. The parliament did disclose, though, that there were 61 objections and 5 abstentions. The delisting means that the TPLF can participate in a regional interim administration. It's one of the provisions of the peace deal which was struck late last year in South Africa. Despite progress on the political front, reconciliation still appears far off. Some MPs have accused the TPLF of failing to disarm and demobilize, in line with the November peace deal. And in Tigray, life is still far from back to normal. Though there has been some resumption of basic services and aid deliveries, health workers who are still without pay say that medical supplies are insufficient and that people are starving. With tens of thousands of people killed and millions displaced, it could also take years to establish accountability.
Members of Uganda's queer community and the international community have reacted with horror after Uganda's parliament passed a strict anti-LGBTQ+ law on Tuesday. The bill could see people who even publicly identify as queer face up to 10 years or life in prison, with some infractions even fetching the death penalty. Jonamil Jamin has the details.
A deep sense of shock and fear engulfs Uganda's LGBTQ community. Their way of life turned on its head after Tuesday's anti-homosexuality bill was passed in Parliament. The new law has drawn the ire of the Western world.
It would impinge upon universal human rights, jeopardize progress in the fight against HIV/AIDS.
Human rights chiefs meanwhile argue the bill could give license to incite harm upon one another.
It will render lesbian, gay and bisexual people in Uganda criminals simply for being who they are and for existing.
Under the bill, people caught having gay sex would face life in prison. So-called aggravated homosexuality, used to describe gay sex committed without consent or against children, would be punishable by death. The legislation also outlaws even identifying as LGBTQ, inciting fear from rights advocates.
I don't know if there are going to be concentration camps or rehabilitation centers that are so discriminatory, because many people are going to be internally displaced.
Uganda was already notorious for intolerance of homosexuality, which has been criminalized since the colonial era. Discussions leading up to the vote were also laced with homophobic rhetoric, as lawmakers conflated sexual abuse with consensual same-sex activity between adults.
We are making to reinforce the law enforcement officers to make sure that homosexuals have no space in Uganda.
It's a position reflected on the streets of Kampala, as many locals on Wednesday expressed their support for the bill.
God created man and woman, and we cannot accept one sex to go on the same sex.
It is okay, because I can't see such a child of mine doing such a thing.
The new legislation will now be sent to President Yoweri Museveni, who will choose whether to sign it into law. But some analysts say Uganda's leader may prove reluctant to repeat history and avoid damaging his country's reputation in the eyes of foreign investors and donors.
Violence in DR Congo's North Kivu has displaced almost 1 million people. Camps for these internally displaced people are popping up, but those living there are facing horrifying conditions, especially for women. More and more of them are breaking their silence and telling their harrowing stories of sexual assault. France 24's Aurélie Bazara Kimbangula sent us this report.
Jo's still deeply traumatized. The violence of the attack she suffered whilst fleeing clashes between DRC's armed forces and M23 militia is still fresh in her mind. She was targeted by 4 men as she sought shelter in this camp in Bulengo, North Kivu.
It happened as I was walking back to the camp. During the day, I usually go to the nearby village to sell some vegetables. That's when they arrived, dressed in uniforms, machetes in their hands. They threatened to kill me and raped me, all 4 of them.
Stories like Jo's are not rare in this 100,000-strong displacement camp.
Men destroyed me while I was looking for wood to cook. Now I only look for wood really near the camp. I'm terrified. But what choice do I have? I need to find ways to survive for my son and I.
Victims of sexual abuse go through life carrying physical and psychological scars. Recently, some have come together to try to find help in this tent in Bulengo. This clinic is focused solely on sexual violence cases. Here, they can discreetly confide in the nurses and be treated.
These are my medical kits.
This nurse prescribes medications and vaccines to prevent infections. Estimating the number of rapes committed during this conflict is almost impossible. However, nurses anecdotally say that consultation requests are multiplying. Suzanne now sees an average 10 women per day.
They arrive here in tears. It's very emotional. We listen to them, we try and help them, and we tell them that what happened is not their fault. So with time, they manage to express how they feel.
Since the clinic opened in February, nurses have counseled and cared for more than 200 sexually abused women. Women make a large proportion of those fleeing the fighting in DRC's east. Humanitarian organizations fear the number of rape victims will rise dramatically as the conflict drags on.
This Wednesday is UN World Water Day. According to the United Nations, 1 in 4 people, that's 2 billion people worldwide, lack safe drinking water, with 1.4 million people dying annually of diseases related to poor water and sanitation. Kathy Clifford has more on the situation in Ivory Coast.
A long walk for these women to fetch water. In this suburb of Abidjan, many residents have limited access to drinking water, and in some neighbourhoods the taps have dried up completely.
They should do something about the water problem. We've had no water in the house for over a year. Every day we have to collect it. We're so tired of it.
Wells and water sources on the outskirts of the city are the only reliable resources. The shortage brings major health issues. Contaminated water and a lack of sanitation lead to the transmission of diseases such as cholera and hepatitis A.
We need to have clean toilets, clean houses, and for that we need water. If not, the children breathe in the filth and can get sick.
Water shortage and drought are also impacting agriculture. Cocoa production, which amounts to some 15% of GDP and 600,000 farmers across Ivory Coast, is affected by climate change. In 2022, desertification was already affecting 60% of farmland in the country, bringing hardship for farmers and food insecurity. Electricity production is also affected, as hydroelectric dams regularly run dry.
And finally, banned under the Gaddafi regime, boxing is experiencing something of a renaissance in Libya. The sport is developing rapidly and becoming increasingly popular, despite still being critically underfunded. Lauren Burstershire has the story.
Taking a break between two training sessions, Omar Zlitny pulls out an old picture on his phone. It shows a young fighter in his prime, his eyes full of determination. At 18 years old, Zlitny appeared destined for a career in boxing, but his blossoming dream ended abruptly through no fault of his own.
I was very ambitious. I was going to fight in Italy, but suddenly boxing was banned. I got frustrated, and I decided to quit.
In 1979, Muammar Gaddafi banned all combat sports in Libya. They were officially too violent, but also capable of producing champions who could threaten the dictator's cult of personality. When Gaddafi was ousted in 2011, Zlitny reunited with his old sparring partners and decided to breathe new life into Libyan boxing. Now in his 60s, he manages a gym where he coaches fighters of all ages, backgrounds, and gender.
I hope more women can take up boxing. Being a woman doesn't prevent you from getting in the ring.
Despite the progress, boxing is still critically underfunded in Libya. Making do with aging gloves and dusty rings, these young athletes remain focused on their goal, getting selected to represent their country at the 2024 Paris Olympics.
Well, that's it for this edition. Stay tuned to France 24. There's more news coming up next.